A lone woman hears desperate scratching on her cabin door in the dead of winter. When she opens it, she finds a shivering wolf family huddled in the snow, their eyes pleading for help. She knows letting them in could save them. She also knows it could destroy her. Before we dive into today's topic, make sure to subscribe to the channel to stay updated with all our latest videos. Don't forget to like and comment your thoughts below. I love hearing from you. The northern forest lay under a crushing blanket of white as another brutal winter storm rolled over the land with a kind of ancient fury. The wind screamed through the towering pines like a warning from something older than memory, and the snow churned in thick spirals that erased the path of anything that dared to move. Far from any town or trail stood a small cabin, half buried in drifts, its roof sagging under the weight of endless storms. Inside the cabin lived Mara, a woman who had chosen this isolation because the world beyond the forest had given her more grief than hope. She had come here to mend herself, surrounded by silence and the steady companionship of the wilderness, but even solitude carried its limits, and this winter pressed against them with a cold so fierce it felt alive. Night was falling, and Mara moved through the dim interior of her home, arranging wood near the hearth, and tightening her coat around her shoulders. She listened to the fire crackle as she worked. It was the only sound that did not feel hostile. Outside, the storm pounded at the walls as if trying to force its way in. Every gust shook the windows and carried icy tendrils beneath the door. Mara had seen winters in this forest before, but nothing like this season. It came early and showed no mercy. Animals had grown scarce, supplies dwindled faster than expected, even the river had frozen into a solid sheet weeks ahead of time. She had begun to feel the weight of it in her bones. She bent down to feed another piece of firewood into the flames, when a sound broke through the roar of the storm. A thin cry, almost too faint to catch. Mara froze. She waited. The wind battered the walls again, but beneath it she heard something else. Another soft sound, a whine. Desperate and trembling, Mara rose slowly and stepped toward the door. Her heart beat a little faster with every step. The forest held predators, and she knew that desperation drove even the gentlest creatures into dangerous corners. The sound came again, closer, this time scratching. A faint scrape that rose and fell in uneven rhythms. She pressed her ear to the door. There was no mistaking it now. Something was outside, alive, cold, and pleading. With a steadying breath, she gripped the handle and pulled the door open against the howling wind. Snow whipped past her face, stinging her skin. What she saw on the porch stole the breath from her lungs. A wolf stood only a few feet away, its legs shaking under the weight of its own body. Frost clung to its fur like shards of broken glass. Its eyes, dulled by exhaustion, raced to meet hers. Behind it, two small pups shivered so violently she could hear the faint tapping of their teeth. The wolves were on the edge of collapse. For a moment, Mara forgot about fear. This was no threat. This was a family pushed far beyond survival. She stepped aside, hesitating only long enough to consider the danger. A wolf could still lash out even in weakness, but she saw no aggression, only a silent play. Thelfa staggered into the cabin and crumpled near the hearth. The pups stumbled after it, collapsing in a trembling heap beside their parent. Mara shut the door quickly to seal out the storm, then backed away, giving them space. The heat of the fire washed over the room, and the wolves breathed it in with fragile urgency. She fetched blankets and laid them on the floor, aware of every twitch of their bodies. The pups burrowed into the cloth almost immediately. The alpha only lifted its head long enough to acknowledge her caution before lowering it again slowly. Mara crouched by the wall, watching them with an uneasy heart. She had never been this close to wolves before. Not even tracks in the snow had brought her this near, yet here they were in her home, huddled around her. Hours slipped by with only the crackle of burning wood and the faint ragged breaths of the wolves filling the room. The storm raged outside with a relentless fury that made the cabin groan. Mara kept the fire strong. She did not sleep. Not with 3 wild animals in her living room, even if they were half frozen and barely conscious. As time passed, she noticed more details under the frost that covered the alpha. Deep raw gashes along its flank, the kind made by metal traps, not by teeth or claws. Its ribs were visible beneath its coarse fur, as if it had been running for days. The pups were thinner than she had ever seen wolf pups, their breaths shallow, their limbs stiff with cold. Something terrible had chased them long before the storm found them. When dawn pressed its pale glow against the frost-coated windows, Mara rose to gather more wood. Outside, she paused before opening the door, listening for signs of danger. Hearing only the dying roar of wind, she stepped out into the biting cold. The storm had passed, leaving a world smothered under a fresh, heavy layer of snow. Her boots sank deep as she walked around the cabin toward her woodpile. That was when she saw the footprints, large, human, pressed deep into the snow from the weight of a grown man. They approached her porch from the forest, stopped directly in front of her door, then turned away, disappearing into the tress. Mara stared at them, her pulse quickening. Someone had been outside her cabin during the storm. Someone had been watching. Cold gathered in her chest, heavier than the winter air. The wolves had not simply wandered to her home, they had been driven, forced, hunted. She followed the prints a short distance before the wind erased them, but it was enough to confirm her fear. Someone was after the wolves, someone who had come close enough to stand at her door, someone who might return. She hurried back inside, closing the door firmly and checking the latch twice. The alpha watched her with weary, unblinking eyes. As if it knew what she had discovered, Mara sat near the fire with the wolves, feeling the weight of a new and silent threat pressing into the cabin walls outside. The forest lay still under its blanket of white, but beneath the quiet danger moved Asterisk. The morning after the storm settled into a heavy stillness that felt almost unnatural, as if the forest itself held its breath in uneasy silence. Mara moved quietly through the cabin, her eyes drifting often to the wolves that lay near the fading fire. The pup slept curled tightly together while the alpha rested with its head lifted just enough to watch her with a familiar intensity. The heat of the flames had thawed some of the frost in their fur, revealing not only exhaustion but deep old fear etched into every bruise and wound. Mara sensed that helping them had drawn her into something larger than she understood. She made broth from what little she had and placed a bowl on the floor, sliding it slowly toward the wolves. The pups stirred at the smell, their noses twitching weakly. The alpha nudged them forward, though it did not take any for itself at first. Only after the pups finished did it lower its own head to lap. A few slow, careful mouthfuls, as if unsure its strength was enough to handle the warmth. Mara watched them for a long moment, her mind replaying the image of the footprints outside her door. They had been large, with the confident stride of someone who knew these woods well enough to move through a storm that could kill. She had hoped that isolation would shield her from every danger that men carried, but now she felt a chill far colder than winter ere she stepped outside again to gather wood, needing to see the land in daylight to judge any signs of movement. The sky was clear and pale, the kind of icy blue that seemed to ring like glass. Her breath smoked in the air as she walked around the cabin. Snow glistened untouched except for the tracks from the night before, her own footsteps, the wolves' faint imprints where they had approached, and the deeper, heavier marks of the stranger. Mara followed those heavy steps beyond the porch toward the tree line. Only a short distance away, she found a place where branches had been snapped and bushes crushed by the weight of someone pushing through with little care. She moved further, guided by instinct more than sight. Soon she reached a clearing where the snow looked disturbed by struggle. There she found the remains of a metal snare torn open, as if something had pulled against it with violent desperation. The steel edges were streaks of fur and smudges of dried blood that glinted darkly beneath the sunlight. A tremor moved through her. This was no simple hunter providing for winter. This was someone who set cruel traps and left animals to suffer, someone relentless. Rumors whispered in the small towns came back to her stories of a man known as Bracken, a trapper who roamed these woods with the arrogance of someone who believed he owned the land. He knew how to survive storms that would kill others. He moved without fear. His traps were found where no traps should be. Some said he enjoyed pursuit more than he needed food or money. If Bracken had followed these wolves, he would not stop. And if he had seen their tracks outside her home, then Mara had unknowingly stepped into his path. The thought chilled her more deeply than the wind. She turned quickly and returned to the cabin with haste, fighting the dread that crept up her spine. Inside, the wolves stirred as she entered. The alpha lifted its head as if reading her face, and understanding that danger hunted nearby. Mara sat close to the fire, letting its warmth soak into her shaking hands. She watched the wolves and wondered how they had survived as long as they did with wounds like those.